That's another incentive for you to come back, right? All right, welcome for another chat with Chu, and that's me, I guess. As many of you know, the series is really intended to bring practitioners, distinguished practitioners who are doing great work in environmental protection and climate protection work. And today I have really great three distinguished colleagues from the Environmental Protection Agency who I would categorize as public servants who are appointed by the Biden-Harris administration to lead three of our largest organizations at EPA. The first person, I should go from there to this direction, from east to west. East, we have Lisa Garcia, who is the regional administrator for EPA Region 2, based in New York City. And then Meg McCollister, who is based in Kansas City, EPA Region 7. She obviously is heading up our Heartland region. And then finally, I think the person who's important to you in this region, this is Martha Guzman, who is based in our San Francisco office. She leads our San Francisco office, who heads up all the programs in the Pacific Southwest, including Arizona. So that's all I'll say in terms of introductions, because as you know, the format of this chat is, the first part of it is really getting to know our speakers and our guests, and really getting to know about their career and personal and professional journey to where they've gotten before I start chatting with them about the EPA work that all of you are also interested in. So as a way to get started, let me start. Maybe I shouldn't just start with you, Martha, because I know people all gave me ideas about who I should start with. But let me start with Meg. And here's why. I have to say, she's actually my boss in a real life. So you guys all know, yeah, you guys all know. At the last meeting I mentioned. Oh, so I'll mention Michael Crow again too, because you got to always talk about your boss. Anyway, so Meg. So, Meg, you know, we've just known each other for about 2.5 years now. And I think the first time, there's also a pattern in my relationship with these distinguished guests, is that coffee shop. Yeah. So I met Meg at a coffee shop. So, and we had some great conversations to get to know each other. And because she's a presidential appointee and in the federal government, I am the career leader for our organization. So it's really important for all of us to be connected with each other. So I got to know Meg in a very, both her professionally and personally. So let me just start by asking you, which will be the questions for all of you as well. If you could just describe kind of from where you started, and I'd like you to kind of talk about high school and college first, and then to where you ended up, because I think the first question that I get from students and other folks is always, Ed, how do I do what you do? And people are going to ask you, how do you do what you do? How do I get to your point, right? And my answer always is, it's a journey, and everyone has a different journey and a story to tell. So that's what I'd like all of you to kind of talk about. So let me start with you, Meg, and then we'll come to you, Martha, and then to Lisa.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you. So hi, I'm Meg. I am also I'm Ed's boss, which is a lot of fun. And I know he's just having the best time here. So I hear wonderful things about all the work that you're all doing here and the things that you're studying and what you're contributing. So Ed asked that we start with kind of, you know, our personal professional journey. So I figured I'd start at the very beginning and try not to get stuck in any rabbit holes. So feel free to ask me about anything afterwards. But I grew up, I was born and raised in the greater Kansas City area, between Kansas and Missouri. Both of my parents were public servants. My mom was a judge. My dad was also a lawyer, ran a small nonprofit that provided free and reduced cost legal services to low income populations. So before I really even knew it, kind of the public service piece was in my blood. But I also very much enjoyed being outside as a kid, all the time, always when kids were in I don't know, sitting inside reading books or even outside reading books. I was outside chasing butterflies and like, doing the little thing where you put grass between your thumbs and jumping in creeks and all of that kind of thing. I just loved breathing fresh air and getting my feet in the creek, and that's always been my thing, even now. And my kids are the same way. So fast forward, I guess in high school, I did a lot of the same things that I'll talk about in college, but I think college and law school really were significant periods of growth for me. So I'll focus on that. Like I said, I went to the University of Kansas, which is in Lawrence, Kansas, and I studied poli-sci, history, and Latin American studies. And I had one summer where I interned in DC on the Hill, and I interned for the congressman who's covers the Kansas City district. And I remember it was summer of 2007. He was on then Speaker Pelosi's Select Committee on Global Warming, and they had just come back from this trip where they were in Greenland and they were on a boat, watching ice just, melt off of the glacier into the ocean. And he was standing there giving this account to us, and he was just overwhelmed by that experience. And all of us sitting there in the office with him were also, I was overwhelmed by that experience. I think that was really the moment where I truly felt in my bones that, global warming is going to be the crisis of my generation. So fast forward to law school, where I went to University of Missouri, Kansas City. So just to skip away from Lawrence. I studied, well, you get just a law degree, but I did my emphasis in urban land use and environmental law. And that was also a really incredible experience for me to learn, about all the environmental laws. And eventually I would go spend some time out in Sonoma, California, which is, of course, the Mecca for for environmentalists. And you read about all the cases in law school. And one summer I interned for EPA. And that was really incredible. One thing I'm sure we will get to eventually in this talk is the importance of internships and connecting with students. That was a really, really pivotal moment for me also. I still remember who my supervisor was. I remember getting CAFO briefings from Dan Breedlove in our regional counsel's office. And that really put me on the path to saying, okay, I want to be involved in the environmental field. And after law school, I ended up moving out to California just coincidentally because my husband got a job offer that was going to move us out there. So twist my arm, I'm going to move to California. And since I had just taken the bar and I wasn't really sure I wanted to study for the California bar at that point, I decided I was just going to network, which is a really important thing to do. Network. Go to any meetings that I can, just get on any, email lists, just see what's going on in the community. And I did get involved in a lot of the environmental issues that were going on. But in the meantime, I applied for a fellowship with President Obama's reelection campaign. And I got that fellowship, loved it. I got hired on as staff and ended up managing kind of the North Bay of California region for that campaign. And then that ended up being my career path, basically, was ever since then. And we moved back to Kansas City in 2016 after we had our first daughter. But working with campaigns, candidates, also nonprofits and small businesses, a lot of course, a lot of campaign work, but community engagement work, communications, how you kind of deliver messages, but also engage with communities. So that's been something that has been really nice for me to bring to this position, which again we'll get to later. We're sticking with the personal journey part now, but that was a really great experience for me coming into this role.
But before I go to Martha, I will just have to tell you that we still have the cubicle that she sat in Kansas City when she interned with us. So just so you know, but we also remember her. Right.
Thank you. It's nice to hear people's stories because you learn new things about each other, even in these forums. So my office is in San Francisco, but I actually live in Sacramento, which is where I grew up. I grew up in Sacramento, and my parents, well, my dad worked for the state transportation agency, Caltrans, for his career. And my mom did just about any job from janitor to mini blind manufacturing. And she finally actually through a junior college program that UC Davis had, because she was working there for like medical records or something, she became a carpenter. So most of her career, she was a carpenter for the medical system in Sacramento. And okay, so from Sacramento, I went to DC to do my undergrad at Georgetown University. And you know, you guys maybe remember choosing your college. It's kind of like one day you could have gone here, the next day you could have gone there, right? So I think much of that is like the rest of life, which is, you know, it doesn't have to be perfectly planned, but when there's an opportunity, you can decide to take it. So I went to DC for 4 years and it was a lot of fun. I think anywhere you're that age, it's probably a lot of fun. Certainly looks like it around here. I was in the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown, which was really my pathway there was at the time that I was in high school, there was a governor in California called Pete Wilson. You guys are going to really resonate with this, any of you Arizonans, because you deal with many of these dynamics on immigration politics. And at that time, the governor of California wanted to take away any birthright citizenships to the immigrant kids. So no access to education, no access to healthcare, nothing. Of course, fortunately, that was found to be unconstitutional. However, really kind of that was my first kind of wake up call to politics and like why it matters that you have a governor that, you know, maybe as a Mexican, everybody's like, you know, I go to over here to Arizona. My mom's side of the family is from Sonora. So, you know, they're closer to me than Lisa is or even Meg, you know. So this whole construct of how you see immigration really differs from who you are, right? Obviously, as your own life experience. And for me, that was a wake up call. So I went to Georgetown for that. But my senior year, I had a girlfriend who took me out to volunteer at a protest outside of a grocery chain headquarters for the United Farm Workers because they were having a strawberry campaign to try to get like the price of a box of strawberry to go up so that farm workers could get a living wage. So that was my volunteer work my senior year in college. And then instead of going the foreign service pathway that most of my friends did at the School of Foreign Service, I went to work for the UFW. So my parents were like, what? Okay. We went to DC to come back to Salinas, California. And so this is, I worked for them for the UFW for 5 years. And really that really was the introduction to the environment for me from a public health perspective, whether it was, you know, heat illness, pesticide exposure, drinking water, basic infrastructure in communities. And I had a really wonderful boss. I was moved back to the political department in Sacramento, and under her, she was like, you got to look at the system. So go get your master's. And I went to Davis for my master's in agricultural and natural resource economics. And I did learn a lot about both just thinking sustainably, but also the agricultural system in particular. And then I went to work for a nonprofit called California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation. And so I became a lobbyist. I did a lot of administrative lobbying for the UFW, like on the heat standard and pesticide regulations. So I lobbied for the UFW. And then I also started when I went to California Rural Legal Assistance, I was a lobbyist for them as well. But that was all legal aid attorneys. So I learned a lot more about the law side and the regulatory side coming from an organizing side. And I was there for 6 years. And then Arnold Schwarzenegger was elected, and everything that we proposed was vetoed. It was like kind of my job became a little bit pointless. He was great on the climate. He was one of the first Republicans who really spoke courageously about that, but he was very ironically anti-immigrant. And so much of what I was working for was kind of pointless. So I went to work on a farm for 3 years and also did some administrative lobbying while I, kind of doing everything. So I worked on a farm out in Santa Cruz County, Swantonberry Farm. And then I started a nonprofit that was a political organization, and we had a PAC, and we did a lot of political work in very purple areas in California that are very rural, but not like Fresno, Coachella. Those are very dense areas, but have very rural and very agricultural based economies. And then Jerry Brown got elected, and I went to I just share this part of the story because I went to the Secretary of Agriculture, reached out to see if I wanted to be her legislative director. And so then they have these meetings to kind of confirm people, like, are you okay, in the governor's office? And then I was very fortunate enough that opened a different door. So in the end, I ended up working for Governor Brown for 6 years, and I was his legislative deputy on environmental, agricultural issues, which was water issues. And I was, 6 years there. And then he appointed me to what's called the California Public Utilities Commission. And I was a commissioner there for 5 years. And then I was appointed here. So I did a lot as a commissioner, obviously on energy and affordability and sustainability. And this is the commission that, similar to Arizona's, what is it called here? Public Service Corporation. Except we are appointed. Those guys unfortunately have a harder job. They have to get elected. And so anyway, a huge opportunity there, and obviously focus a lot on energy policy. And that's my journey.
At each other, right? I mean, you guys have, I know some of you were wondering that we have kind of orchestrated things, but Dave White will tell you that this is all coming from the heart as you speak, I think. So thank you for that. I really learned a lot, Martha, about your.
Thank you. Yeah, we're definitely learning a lot. So Lisa Garcia, I can wrap it up pretty quickly. Puerto Rican Jew from the Bronx. I way of growing up for about 8-9 years in Caracas, Venezuela. But lucky for us, because the family was in the Bronx, I would summer in the Bronx. Not many people can say that. And exactly, yeah. But grew up in a family that was very politically aware. My parents were in the civil rights movement, and fast forward, anything that was going on, any kind of rally or campaign for mayor or for other elected roles, the kids came with them, the cousins, Puerto Riqueñas, the primas, primos, everyone's got to get in the car and go downtown or uptown or wherever. So definitely grew up very politically, I guess, aware. And we didn't eat grapes for almost the whole time growing up because of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta and the United Farm Workers Association. So it was that kind of household, what's the issue that we all need to be very aware of and do something about. So we moved back from Venezuela. I finished high school in Teaneck, New Jersey. And the reason that we moved to Teaneck, New Jersey is because my mother did her homework and found that it was the first town in New Jersey that was desegregated. So again, everything we did, there was some value that we had to embrace at the time. So finished high school in Teaneck, New Jersey, went to a state university, Stony Brook University. And I thought I wanted to go into medicine or to health or something science related. And I guess like to the fun part of school. got more involved in the student activities and the evening activities and realized that I needed something a little easier. So switched my major to political science. Well, at Stony Brook, it was easier. I don't know, easier than physics. Um, so, and then started down this road of political science. It's so broad, you know, what do you do with that? Came home and worked for in New Jersey, they have an assembly. So worked for an assemblyman. And still, that wasn't really what I loved. So drove across country to California, lived in San Francisco, drove across country again, went backpacking through Europe, came back to New York, and eventually started trying to fund my trips, working as a paralegal. So they have these temp agencies where you can work as a paralegal and you get hired for 5-6 months. And worked at, you guys don't know, we're totally learning about each other. So these temp jobs as a paralegal help fund my trips overseas or across country. And I really started getting into the legal question of what I was doing, or the power of law, I guess. Even though working for an elected official, I realized that they wrote the laws, but lawyers, you could actually persuade how that interpretation is. And that I found a little bit more fascinating. And it also funded my trip. So so eventually I decided, okay, I want to apply to law school, and got into Brooklyn Law School. And I had an idea that I wanted to do international human rights. Again, kind of thinking of ways we can use the law. You know, my background, so human rights or something rights related was going to be embedded in that. And at Brooklyn Law School, I took a course on international human rights. And then I decided that I hadn't traveled for a few semesters, so I need to go someplace. Did a semester in Spain, and in Spain, to fill my classes, there was something called international environmental law, and it was the 9 a.m. slot. I took it. And so this is the pivotal moment for me, where I fell in love with the topic of saving the planet and using the law to influence countries to work together to protect tuna or to protect dolphins. And to protect elephants in Africa. Anyway, so I came at it from a completely different angle. It was just like, I'll take this course because nothing else is going on. And when I came back from Spain, I went to the career office and I said, I really want to do international environmental law. And because the school is in New York City, and because the school has to raise money, they said, great, go to a big corporate law firm, because then you'll make a lot of money and you can donate to us. They didn't say that, but it was clear. And you can do pro bono work. And if anyone knows about lawyers and pro bono work, it's like 0.5% of the time that they do work. Other times it's representing corporate clients. And I said, no, I actually want 95% of my time to be international human rights. And that was the end of my relationship with the Career Center. So I went and found my own kind of internship. And this is why it's so important. Sometimes the list of internships may not be what you love. So go talk to other people. I just knocked on the door of the New York City Environmental Division and said, do you take interns? And they're like, yeah, what school? Brooklyn Law School. We've never had an intern from Brooklyn Law School. Well, here I am. So that's how it started, just finding my own internship. And that's a little bit of how I came to the environmental law, or at least the practice of environmental law. Should I stop there?
No, I learned a lot of
Like
things
shtick?
about you. Yes.
Yeah.
So I want to stay on this topic a little longer. So we'll come back this way so you can keep your microphone. So we first met I still remember 2009 at a Pete's Coffee Shop at Metro Center in Washington, D.C. And I remember that because you made such an impression on me. But at that time, you were already beyond all the things that you mentioned. You were already coming to be part of the Obama administration, right? So tell us and tell everyone how that happened and what pivoted you towards a career that took you into not just politics, but environmental policy, and for that particular president in particular.
Fun meeting you right at the beginning. So before Obama gets elected, I am now graduating from law school a few years before that. And I decided I wanted to go back to Spain and try to do international environmental law. So I'll just go off topic for a second, or this is what happened to me in Spain. I go to Greenpeace again. I'm the one always knocking on doors. I want to find this job. I go to Greenpeace in Madrid and I say, I want to work with your environmental lawyers. And this woman's like, we don't have environmental lawyers. They were just signing on to a lot of the resolutions in 2001 and 2002 to adopt like environmental laws from Germany. So Spain had none. And they said, we don't have environmental lawyers. And I said, you must have someone, right? I mean, this is like Greenpeace, and we see people swinging from ships in the Mediterranean. Like, and they say, oh, we want that lawyer. So they give me the number to a lawyer. I call the lawyer and he's like, I'm the lawyer for Greenpeace. Yes, but I'm not an environmental lawyer. I'm a criminal lawyer. I get them out of jail after they get arrested. So I started working at just a regular law firm doing contract law. And really, even though the experience in Spain was great, I missed the environmental work because it was kind of the beginning of my career. So fast forward, went to Washington, D.C. There's a public interest career fair. So for anyone, there's career fairs that are great. And I come across someone who has a pamphlet on environmental justice. And I said, what is this environmental justice thing? And he explains, well, in New York City, there's a lot of low-income communities of color that have most of the polluting facilities. And so the environmental justice movement came about because they realized everyone's trying to protect Yellowstone and our great outdoors, and the facilities that help put our lights on, that take our trash, that produce all of our plastic, Tupperware, whatever, they're in communities of color. And we need to stop the siting of those facilities only in communities of color. And I said, well, I want to work there. And he's like, we don't have any jobs yet. So what did I do? I interned for free at this organization and started representing community groups in New York City, trying to make sure that we had equitable distribution of siting facilities, basically. Power plants, you need to also look in Manhattan, where Manhattan lights up like a Christmas tree. Why are all the power plants in the Bronx or in Long Island? Waste transfer stations. So that's what kind of brought me to the community lawyering piece, representing communities on environmental justice issues. I worked for a nonprofit organization for about 5 years. And then went to the Attorney General's office to stand up a new kind of EJ working group. And from there, it was pretty quick. So Spitzer was the Attorney General, gets elected governor. They asked me to go to the governor's office and help with the state. Help as I'm an advisor for environmental justice to the commissioner at the state. 2009, Obama gets elected. I get a call for this wonderful opportunity to move to Washington, D.C. to be advisor for environmental justice to Administrator Lisa Jackson and then Administrator Gina McCarthy. And so it was just like quick, but these wonderful opportunities to figure out how the government can implement policies and money to address the environmental degradation and inequality, I would say. And then I was on the transition team for Biden Harris, and they asked me to join the region. So
Thank you
thank you.
for sharing. So Meg, she already went into the pivotal moment. How about a pivotal moment for you, how your trajectory of what you were doing, how it pivoted into not only environmental policy work, but I think you mentioned the ICE story, but the other is getting into the administration and what is driving you in your current position right now.
Oh, good. So I'll share, I did share that one pivotal experience. I'll share another one that is actually not necessarily related to the environment, but I felt like was a really pivotal moment for me. When I was in law school, I don't know if anyone else here has been to law school. It's really grueling. It's it's hard. I get through my first year and I'm doing just fine, but I'm not necessarily completely connecting with what I think of as being the traditional future of someone who goes to law school. And at the end of the first year, you know, you're kind of signing up for your next classes and figuring out what you're going to do. And there was a trial advocacy course that I did a good enough job in my second semester of the first year that I was supposed to sign up for it in the first semester of my second year, because that's what you do when you do a good enough job in the first part of the course. And I was talking with one of my professors, who's, you know, still my favorite professor there. And I was just really struggling over this decision because I was like, that's great that I can get into this course, but it was just like, you know, when you have that kind of pit of your stomach, like stress, and you can't totally identify it. And I was talking to her about this and she was like, Meg, you don't like that. And I was like, no, I don't. And she was like, if you don't like it, don't do it. Like, don't force yourself into that box. And I was like, but I'm supposed to do that because I got into the course. And she basically, I don't need to go into that. You kind of get the point, but she basically gave me permission to do the thing that I was really interested in and to follow the path that seemed right for me and not to go the path that I thought I was supposed to want to go on. And that was just like the relief in that moment, and like being able to think about, you know, kind of through a new lens going into the future of like, I can follow the path that I'm really interested in, not necessarily the path that I think I'm supposed to want to follow because it's like just what people do. And I decided I didn't really want to practice law in the traditional sense. I knew that before the end of the second year of law school, and that was okay. I still finished law school. I still took the bar exam. I passed the bar exam. I got licensed, and of course then promptly moved to California. But that also gave me that freedom to pursue the things that I was really interested in, and how I really ended up going down more of the political path, or the proactive side of law, I guess I would say, still having an incredible educational foundation for the things that I wanted to do, and be able to then go into all of those conversations out there related to the environment and look at it from a legal lens, or, you know, a different type of analytical lens. And what else did you want me to talk about? Eventually, when I got back to Kansas City, I was able to continue doing some of the environmental work, some additional other work that was community related. And the congressman that did you want me to? Oh, sure, I'll share. We'll peek behind the curtain a little bit. The congressman that I interned for back in 2007 was the one who called me up and said, Meg, I'd like to recommend you for this position that I'm currently in now, because of all the, you know, kind of different perspectives that I brought that he hoped would be a good representation for the current administration. So it's really excited to be able to do that.
So internships and following your passion, right? So I'll give you the final word for this segment in terms of your pivotal moment. I think Meg also got into, and Lisa also got into the administration. That would be kind of opening the curtain a bit, however you want to share.
Maybe I'll start there. I don't know, pivotal moment. But way to the Obama administration because I was currently not finished with my term as a Public Utilities Commissioner, but it was coming up in about a year and a half or so. And so I got a call from Jared, who had the previous regional administrator who had served during the Obama administration. Just reached out and kind of planted the seed and said, you should go for it. And it's a campaign. So you have to like obviously campaign for yourself. And that means, oh, I have this friend who actually works for Senator Padilla, the US Senator. And that friend got me a letter of support from the senator. And, the administration has a whole team that looks at people and gets references and things like that. So, you let people know that you're interested in the position, people who are in elected politics and people who are involved in the rulemakings, essentially. So nonprofit organizations, chamber people, all, whatever it is in your area, agricultural leaders, and having people basically vouch for you that you're not a crazy person and you probably will have a good vision of carrying out the Biden-Harris vision. And obviously the thing that really, I'm sure for all of us was even made us give up our other roles is this commitment to environmental justice and equity and just like out the door with those executive orders. So it was like, okay, we know already at this age that not everything you want to do is going to get done and there's going to be challenges every day. But it's a good challenge to know that the president is saying these things out loud and that you have that to point to when you're trying to get to reforms. So that's that story. I don't know if I have a pivotal moment. I'm sure I do. A lot of pivotal moments.
You can always do that in the Q&A section. All right. Yeah. Well, so the reason that I wanted the sharing of the personal and professional journey is that everyone takes a different path, but it's kind of interesting to see at the end of the day how you actually get into an administration is a very similar path. I mean, I think Martha, you just laid out kind of a roadmap for anybody who wants a political position, right? And for those of you who are in my story, having a career journey is a very different one, but what drives all of us are pretty similar, I think. So, so then now that you're in the room where the decisions are made, not only where the decisions are made, but you actually get to make decisions, right? You guys are the top dog in your organizations. So could you, Martha, start talking about now that you're with the Biden administration, what is the Biden administration doing on climate space, and what is the impact in Region 9, and what are you doing to really help the communities that you took this job to help?
So I think when people generally talk about climate, maybe they talk about like rising sea levels and melting snow and everything like that. But I think the beautiful thing about this leadership in the administration is that we're talking about it from a community-based level. And in fact, the jurisdiction that we have and the regulations and the statutory authorities we have are primarily from the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, as well as like the Superfund Act and other very important acts. But the reason I say that is that the climate work from my perspective is just everywhere. And it's like here, I do a lot of work in Maricopa County on the ozone issue and the non-attainment of ozone. But the thing about tackling ozone is you're going to tackle the climate. It's just coming at it from a localized air pollution issue. And obviously, if you reduce these, pollutants that are causing health issues like heart disease, asthma, and other respiratory ailments, you're going to also help the warming of the climate. And incidentally, it doesn't always work the inverse. So that's a really important thing because sometimes we get too focused on maybe just the carbon and we forget about the NOx and we forget about, other more localized toxic air contaminants. So, so that's, what was the question again? Okay, that's.
So should I do a let's do a high level EPA. You probably all are generally familiar with the Environmental Protection Agency, but our mission is to protect human health and the environment. We are a regulatory agency, as Martha already talked about. We also give out grants. We make sure that contaminated lands are cleaned up by responsible parties. We work with our state counterparts, tribes, territories, universities. There's a lot of stuff that we do. We also have a headquarters in DC, and then we have 10 regions. So that obviously 3 of us here. So that's I guess kind of the high level. In region 7, so my territory is Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, and 9 tribal nations. We are a large ag territory. We have about 80% of our land area is utilized for ag production, which is about double the national average. So working with our ag partners is really important. And one thing that I find a lot that I think some people in urban areas find surprising is that farmers and ranchers are in large part on the front lines of climate change a lot of times. They're dealing with the kind of things that you see in the news all the time, severe storms, flooding, drought, wildfires, changes in like insect and pest pressures. There are a lot of different things that they're dealing with, and that puts a lot of strain and risk to our food system. So a lot of times we're having conversations with our ag partners about how we can support them and work together on innovative ways for them to address the climate crisis, because they're dealing with it all the time. Yeah, okay, that's good. I'll stop there.
So I came in and had like I said, the opportunity to have been in the Obama administration. And so when I was appointed to Region 2, which is New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, and 8 Indian nations, most of them upstate New York. So it's like my home region, like I embody so much of the region, and it was just great to be able to serve. One of the things that I was excited about when coming into this administration was, day one, the executive orders on environmental justice and climate justice, equity. And so it was really exciting to think of ways that I could maybe take what we did in the Obama administration, like creating a mapping tool, EJ Screen or EJ Legal tools, and kind of take it to the next level with this whole of government commitment. A lot of times when you go into communities, they're not just talking about environment. They're definitely not talking about environment one day, jobs the next day, health the third day, unemployment in a month. They live in this holistic way. So it was great to come in and be able to focus in on that whole of government approach. And I knew that there's about 1,000 people in Region 2. They know how to do the work of EPA. They get the day-to-day work. So if I could spend my time focusing in on how are we going to kind of have this lens of equity, do our work in a similar way, but focus on climate change, elevate it in a different way. They know the regulatory piece. They know the Superfund sites and the cleanup methods and standards. So how do we work together to get to that climate piece and the EJ and equity piece? And that was really exciting coming into this administration, is thinking of that way, thinking of if you do have a Superfund site, the remedy takes into account that you're in a floodplain zone or flooding. And so how do we think about elevating, even grading out the site to have elevation so that you're not going to flood, or tanks that are elevated. Even little things like that. How do we begin to think of it and put it into, you have your regular document, you could cut and paste a lot of it, but now we're going to embed some of the EJ pieces, community outreach, community engagement, have them review a settlement, just have them review the settlement. It doesn't have to be final, but you have input from a community. Let's translate all of our documents into Spanish, especially in Puerto Rico. I don't know why. We're not doing everything in Spanish in Puerto Rico, but little things like that, that get to this, the essence of equity. And then I'll just finish by saying the great thing that happened in our first year was not only were we talking about it and a committed team to get to these new ways of thinking of doing work, the money came in behind it. So we had the bipartisan infrastructure law that gave EPA $60 billion to think of doing this work and, to be able to do this work with our partners like states and tribes. And even in the guidance to the states or to our partners, we were issuing guidance that said 40% of more of the benefits or of this funding needs to go to disadvantaged communities. And so it was this real kind of sweet spot that we're in now to be able to get the funding behind it, behind our policies and the commitment of the work. And then, of course, in 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act gave EPA another $40 billion to really focus in on climate. So it's just, it was, I don't know, all the stars aligned, so it was great.
Yeah, just a point of facts here. The numbers that she's mentioning just seems like we're just throwing out billion-dollar numbers. To put it into context, EPA's annual budget's about $9 billion. So these are huge amounts of money that we're, in addition to our normal budget and leveraging and it's great that you're talking about leveraging our strength in regulatory actions in many of the areas to do that. Meg, go ahead.
So I was also going to add, I don't think we've mentioned here that at the national level, we actually created an Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. And actually just right now in the regions, we are launching environmental justice. They're all called something a little bit different, but we're launching those same divisions within the regions. So we really are embedding it throughout the agency, but right now we're actually launching those divisions in the regions. So it's a really exciting time to be at the agency.
Martha, I'm going to ask you slightly a different angle to this. Could you, I know you've been doing a lot of work on our tribal lands. Could you say something about that in the connection with the EJA as well as with the investments that the administration is making?
Yeah, we could talk about that for a really long time. And so in my region, I have Arizona, Nevada, California, Hawaii, and the Pacific Territories and the freely associated states. Next week, I have the great privilege to go to American Samoa. And last week, I was in Owens Valley visiting with many of the Paiute tribes. It's the most incredible part of the job. 148 nations here in the region. And really, those are the federally recognized. There's many more, probably 100 more if we counted all the unrecognized in California and Arizona. Not to mention Nevada. But I'll just say what I mean, it's just every week, one of our biggest priorities for us in the region is our work with the Navajo Nation. And, this movie Oppenheimer came out. You guys saw that? Well, of course, they failed to mention the other part of that story, which is all the destruction that was caused from the mining. And the mining that took place there is not like the mining we're seeing today where, typically goes through environmental review. We do some proper monitoring. We put in monitoring wells. There's air monitoring, it's a little better. It was the Wild West at the time. And we have a great historical timeline of all this on our website, which you can check out. But essentially, the assessment part of the work has been taking place for decades, like 40 years. And we have done some emergency cleanups, but there's over 523 abandoned uranium mines on the Navajo Nation alone. And we're so excited that we have about 12 of those sites that have about probably close to, between a third and a fourth of the waste that we're going to be moving on. We're already moving on. We have, proposed remedies. And what does that mean? That means some of it that is more acute is going to be moved off But basically, nobody wants to have uranium waste. So it's not like there's a whole lot of hazardous waste facilities that want this. So we have to negotiate with New Mexico, with Utah, with Arizona. And some of it is going to be consolidated within the nation and what's called a joint repository. And, basically for the last 30 years, once the activity really picked up and really in earnest over the last 15, we have been going after those responsible parties because we didn't have the bipartisan infrastructure law. We didn't have the Inflation Reduction Act. And so we now have the way to fund these cleanups for the majority of these priority sites, which would be up to about half of the waste. And it's a very exciting time, but I'm not going to be too it's not all perfect, because for example, right now we have a site called Quivira where we're going to move 1 million square yards of this stuff. And this is going to go to a local landfill in New Mexico, technically, but it's in a Navajo community because, it's like a Lati land and it's like state land, all this. It's basically still in the community in the nation. And so, people want it to just go really far away. And so it's not, these solutions are difficult because we don't have the option of just, combusting it away. And so we don't want to do that. But, anyway, but it's incredible work. We're working directly with the nation. We're seeing if there's economic opportunity from it. Can we create more opportunity with the waste facilities? So it's a big part of the work with the tribes, but most of our time is spent on all the bread and butter, drinking water, wastewater, solid waste, incredible needs. And, the West, very much arsenic laden problems. So that's a big challenge that really you're all going to solve with the technology in the future about how to bring those O&M costs down.
So I was going to end with one last question, but I think I'm going to have two last questions because you just raised something. One of the issues that I think our sustainability school folks have been interested in and is the idea of making policy decisions when you don't have black and white solutions, right? And lots of uncertain information. So you just described the situation because this morning I was talking with the folks who asked about clean energy transition and nuclear as an option. My immediate answer was to go to where you went, which is how do you deal with the waste? How do you deal with the mining and extraction? And so I'll just toss that to all of you and ask because I know that all of you face questions like that every day, like including NEPA decisions where your transmission lines of solar panels to populated areas and so on. So if you could just kind of share with everyone how you approach those decisions, not whether they're right or wrong, because I don't think that's a right framing, but how do you approach that? And how does your professional background and personal background help with that decision making? I'll go to you first.
So one of the things that I like to think of in this work as we think about dealing with climate issues is in the world of, I guess, environmental advocacy. That's kind of still the new and shiny piece, but doing environmental justice work really requires us to also think of legacy issues. We have to clean up our contaminated sites before we can build that solar panel farm, let's say. And so what's the combination of making sure that we deliver to communities a cleaner, healthier environment, certainly to low-income or communities of color and indigenous populations? They're still dealing with uranium mines and legacy issues. So if you go to only talk to them about solar panels, they're going to say, okay, but our families are dying from the pollution of past decisions. So sometimes we are faced with there is no one clear-cut answer, I guess, and it's maybe a policy decision. The way that I like to think of it is there something that one question, what's the unintended consequence? Let's make sure we're not repeating the decisions of the past. Who's the community? Who's going to benefit and who's not? Again, this unintended consequence piece. And is there a middle ground? So I was just dealing with, and because it was in the press, I can talk about it, but in Puerto Rico, there's a huge problem with clean energy and also just even electricity, like reliable electricity. And during last hurricane, the whole entire island went dark, even though it only hit the western part. So, so obviously there's a huge problem with transmission and distribution and the stability and reliability of the electric grid. So FEMA went in and they built these temporary they shipped in temporary generators. They're natural gas. The whole island has this commitment to go to clean energy. The communities are saying, okay, where's the clean energy? And the energy companies are saying, we need this natural gas or we need the coal-fired power plants for the reliability. So one is we want cleaner air, we want a cleaner community. The other is reliability. We need coal. The FEMA, because the emergency is ending, FEMA is about to leave and take their generators with them. And the government says, don't take the generators. So I'm faced with a situation where the Puerto Rican government wants to buy those generators, but doesn't have a Clean Air Act permit. So they should shut down because they'd be operating in violation of the Clean Air Act. The community knows this. But if we shut down those generators, we could potentially have a huge electricity problem, like, if 350 megawatts would be lost. So the decision there was, Puerto Rico government, you need to go to the community and ask how you're going to mitigate all of those emissions coming from those generators while you're operating out of compliance. So we were faced with this, and like Senator Manchin called me, and we don't know why it was so political, but basically the end result was I couldn't go straight the regulatory route of saying, shut down, you're in violation. I couldn't go maybe the EJ piece and say, you shut down because you're protecting a community. And also then there's the political piece and also a safety issue of having reliable electricity. So that was kind of the middle ground that we said, you can operate, we'll work with the Department of Justice to bring you into compliance and get that permit. In the meantime, you need to mitigate whatever the community thinks would help with mitigation, clean school buses, maybe building solar farm to eventually reduce the need for those fossil fuel generators.
Meg?
So that was an incredible example. I would say that there are generally my approach to decisions. First and foremost, obviously, you have to listen and learn as much as you possibly can. The one thing that I think all three of us are really able to rely on is that we have incredible career staff who are the subject matter experts. So depending on what situation it is that comes up, we have the experts in the room who have been working on some of these things for years. When situations come up that we need to be able to rely on their expertise. And I also ask a lot of questions. And even when I think I have arrived at what I think is the best decision based on the information that I have, I always ask someone to please make a counter argument. Someone play devil's advocate. Someone tell me, what am I missing? And that's always a really good exercise for us to go around and make sure that there isn't some detail that we haven't missed. But, sometimes you don't have all of the information and you still have to make a decision, and that's really hard. But the best thing that you can do is rely on the experts and make the best decision that you can with the information that you have.
Thank you.
Well, I agree wholeheartedly with all that, in that sometimes we don't take the time to actually listen to the community. I know it's so cliche, but it's so true. And it's hard. And it was harder during COVID to just get to these communities. I mentioned already, I was in the Owens Valley last week. It took me, collectively about 7 hours to get there. So I went to Havasupai a couple weeks ago. It took me a little longer. And it's the going into a conversation with respect for that view, and not just the community, but I think myself, because I was like an advocate in this time frame during my youth. I think it's also important to know that the regulated body is also has a lot of knowledge, and most of the time nobody's coming at a situation with like an evil agenda. Even if they're a coal plant facility or an oil drilling facility, um, you know, in many of our communities, it's the same community. Your uncle works for the oil industry or your aunt works for, the mining industry. And so, but the biggest role we have is to listen and to be transparent about what we know are the facts. And sometimes those facts, sometimes they're, if you have a community that's dealing with a mining issue and they have real concerns with their drinking water or their air, and there's not evidence. And sometimes it's the opposite. And so what our job is in a lot of ways is helping communities with their own facts, monitoring, and sometimes it's not us. Sometimes it's asking, in this instance, ADQ to step up and do that, and require the company to do that, and to have this information be readily available and transparent. Because we all have the scientific view that there's no way that mining could ever hit this aquifer, right? All of our science tells us that. But we also now have the knowledge and experience that all those things we thought weren't going to happen, happened. There was this spill, there was this groundwater contamination. And so we have to almost play like, as Meg was saying, like, what is the worst case scenario here though? Like, what happens when this blows up, literally? And so that's really respecting the fears that the community has when there's a regulated industry, and putting in the transparency and the protections. And that doesn't always come just from our jurisdictional authority. We have to work with the local government. We have to work with the tribe. We have to work with the state, and getting that protection in place for the communities. So that's every day.
Thank you for that. And I really appreciate you guys sharing all this. I have one final question, and before we go to Q&A. So I don't know how to put this, but I'll put it very bluntly, which is the folks who make environmental policy do not look like us in general. I mean, you think that everybody in DC are minority and women? I don't think that's the case, right? So you occupy very rare space in leadership positions, right? So what I'd like to hear from you is how you feel about that, and what are some of the challenges and opportunities because of you occupying that very rare space in leadership, because you're a Hispanic woman, and what does that look like for you? How about going with you first?
I think it's we all have a life experience, and obviously my life experience is different than yours and yours. And the importance of having that diversity at every level of society, not just government, but industry, nonprofit, it's really important, because now statistically, like say in a state like California, where the Latino population is hitting over 40%. I think I should know Arizona's statistics, but probably not far off from that, right? Maybe higher. No, okay. 30, okay. So we're just, not that all demographics are unanimous here and we all think the same, anything like that. Certainly not in Arizona. But, we have a life experience that you can have a perspective on certain issues. And that actually trickles into the environment. I had this moment where I realized something that had happened when I was growing up as a kid in Sacramento, that I didn't really reflect on until this position, about how it actually had influenced me. And this is maybe more coming from a EJ community lens than necessarily just Latina. But there was a really bad flood in Sacramento in '86, and the city had to make a decision. It was actually the flood agency, and they broke the levee in a community called Strawberry Manor, and that's where my uncle and his family were, and we were a little further down. And that community was predominantly Black, Mexican, and Vietnamese. We had a very large Vietnamese community there, and it was a decision made by an all-white board that didn't live there, and they decided to save a different part of Sacramento, and they broke the levee there. And so that was looking back at something that we just thought was a natural, it was just a disaster, it was a natural disaster. But really, even in emergencies, there are decisions that are made, you know, and so just as an example of the lens, when just having the lens of the importance, going back to the questions on tribal nations. Well, in the Maui response in Lahaina, the response that we were the first responders there, because after the fire, obviously, to do the first phase of the work on the hazardous cleanup. And our folks started a cultural monitor program. So everywhere we went in, because Lahaina is so dense, it's where the kingdom was, you know, there's so much history there in the soil, in the burnt buildings, that could I say this would have happened without somebody with our leadership to say, yes, this is important. Yes, this is worth paying for. And yes, it's going to slow us down, but it's the right thing to do, is to have the Native Hawaiian community with us every moment in cleaning up Lahaina was a priority. So that's an example when I say I feel like I come with a lens to this work because I'm a woman, because I'm Latina, because I grew up, you know, in a EJ community, fortunate to grow up in a very diverse community. And these kind of decision points are like no brainers, you know, and we obviously had to do a lot of pieces to make that work. But that's just like an example of your life experience as a whole obviously has an influence.
Well, thank you. Right?
So I'll share I guess a different lens. When I first got the call about, you know, is it okay if my name gets, you know, put on a list to be recommended? I remember it was late on a Friday night, and I had a 4-month-old baby, and I was so sleep deprived. And so that was, you know, one thing. But I remember kind of looking at my husband, and I was like, did they call the right person? Like I think of people in this position not looking like us. Perhaps being a little bit older, but not necessarily looking like me. And so that was one thing that I just, you know, sometimes you just got to get over the imposter syndrome and go for it anyway. But definitely one lens that I look through in this job is I have 3 little kids. So my then 4-month-old is now 3.5. My 3 kids are 8, 6, and 3. And I'm always thinking about things from the perspective. I'm first and foremost, I'm a mom. I have 3 little kids. And one issue that we deal with a lot in Region 7 is lead. We have about 50, not quite 50% of the lead in the country is in Region 7. And there's, you know, primarily the greatest risk to kids 6 and under. And I've got a couple of those in my house. So those are things that I think about all the time. And especially when we are engaging with communities, when we are talking to parents or caregivers about lead, that is something that I think about, right? And all other issues, not just with lead, but how can you inform parents? How can you inform educators and care providers of the risks to children and make it easier for them to protect kids? So that's a perspective that I bring with me to this job every day.
Thank you. Lisa.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's great that that we are in these positions, and you know, I think as Meg said, some of us got the call and it was like, me? Can I do this job? And we've heard across the board, women suffer from that, right? Of course you can do the job. Like, stop thinking of it this way. And so what I was going to say is having great mentors and networking throughout your life who can call you and say things like, you are the one who is qualified to do this job. You are absolutely qualified, really helps. And so even throughout this journey, you do hear, and I'll just be honest, you do hear things sometimes. You're sitting in a room and you can't believe someone just said something like that. Or like I've been in, not in this job, but in cases that I've been arguing for communities, and one of the opposing counsel would say, okay, but they already have bad air. And so this contribution of PM or NOx or SOx or ozone isn't going to contribute anything. And it's like, well, that's just ridiculous. So you do come from it, from you take your background, also as a woman, sometimes not even being able to be heard, even though I'm a lawyer too, trying to settle this case. Really interestingly for me is going to Puerto Rico, being the first regional administrator, even though the EPA is 50-something years old, the first Latina and the first person who speaks Spanish to represent the region, even though the region has Puerto Rico. So sometimes you're just faced with these questions or situations and you're like, this is ridiculous, but don't say that out loud. So I think it's really a great opportunity. I think we also have a responsibility to make sure that we pave the path and pave the way to say, you can listen to us and we can listen to you, and we'll make better decisions because we are a diverse team from people from different backgrounds, different history, geographically different. We collectively make better decisions when we talk about the 10 regions and what we want to do for the regions because of our background and because we're listening to each other, but we're also giving that input and confident enough to say we are in the right role and we have an opinion. And I think that really helps.
Great, thank you. So what we're going to go to Q&A, but I have to make one announcement. And Dave, would you like to talk about the MOU that we perhaps, I know this is not on script, but I'll go off script because I think it's really important.
Hi, folks. Dave White with Global Futures Laboratory. And just first of all, I just want to say on behalf of everyone, thank you to our amazing speakers and guests from the EPA. I mean, that was just a really wonderful and heartfelt kind of explanation of your professional and personal journey. And just, we really appreciate the work that you do on behalf of the American people and on behalf of the administration, supporting a healthy environment for everyone. So just really lovely, and really loved hearing your authentic selves and sharing that with us. And we're fortunate, thanks to Ed's facilitation, to have signed a memorandum of understanding this morning with the regional administrators and Provost Gonzalez that is going to further support faculty, student, staff engagement with the EPA, specifically with these 3 regions. And so this will include things like the opportunity for faculty to do joint research in support of the EPA's mission, the opportunity for us to help provide a pipeline of students into EPA positions. Don't be surprised if people come knocking on your door saying, I want to be an intern. Right. Yeah. So I think that could happen after today. Exchanges of faculty and students and a variety of other purposes. So just signed that this morning. So look out for some news to kind of celebrate that accomplishment.
Thank you. How about a hand for? So we will do some Q&A, but I'll also announce that we have a networking reception at 4:30, and it's there will be some food, right? And some refreshments, but it's not right out the door. You'll have to walk down and turn into the center of the building through the doors, and then it's downstairs. So please join us after the Q&A session. Now we'll go to the Q&A. Here, I'll take it. Yes, say who you are and who you're with.
So my name is Mary Cuevas Delgado. I am with ASU's Environmental Health and Safety Department. Prior to that, I worked with the Maricopa County Air Quality Department under Region 9. My question to you is, how do you carry the weight on both sides of being the first? Because I've been in those positions where I'm the first Hispanic person to be in the room or the first person to have come from. And how do you move forward? How do you carry that? How do you reconcile that? Not just on the professional side, but when you go home and you tell your parents about it, your family, what do you do?
Good question.
There's a lot of tequila. Seems to bring everybody together. I think that, you know what, it's like, we have a bachelor's degree in environmental justice because of where we grew up. I mean, that's it. It's just as valuable as what I learned at Georgetown. 100%. You know, now, I still go home and my mom's like, why are you buying organic food? It doesn't make a difference. We still have those debates. But I think it's respecting where we came from. And helping others understand. We were talking earlier today about the shift we've seen in the last 15, 20 years on cultural fire burning. And I remember when I was in the governor's office, so not that long ago, it was like 20 years ago, when the fire chief was debating using that and allowing the use of that in many of the areas that were requesting to do these burns. And it's so the shift on that traditional ecological knowledge from the Native community is now getting, certified. It's now getting, and pretty soon it's going to have that legitimized pathway, right? So it's just an example of saying, it's the same as our knowledge that we grew up with. That's the asset that you come with, because you can translate, not literally, but like literally, you can talk about an issue that actually has maybe an academic box that nobody was calling it that before, but now it does. Now it has value that not was just value in your community, but now has value in the academic world as well. But it sounds like you have a lot of great experience.
Lisa, did you want to comment on that? Oh, Meg.
Oh, I was going to add on that finding like mentors, I think is really important. People that you can lean on to help get you through those times when it's really hard. And anyway, I think that that's a really important piece to this, because sometimes you're doing things that, again, you might not necessarily think are the things you're supposed to do, but it's what you are feeling passionate about and the direction that you really feel in your bones you need to go, and relying on, those mentors that you have around you to give you the confidence to keep going in that direction, I think is important.
Yeah, I would say these are all great points. And for me, it's also finding mentors, but also someone at least that I'm working with. Like when I was in the Obama administration, I used to say there's champions all over the EPA. And if I could just find them and bring them along, then at least I have a cadre or a team of people that are trying to say, EJ screen needs to have race in it. I don't give a shit what the lawyers said. Right. So anyway, so to have people that you can rely on and maybe have a WTF moment with them in private, and then know that you're doing, for you at least, the right thing going outwards. And sometimes that comes with, no recognition, a heartache. Sometimes it's painful to be in those roles, but you have to figure out what your balance is and how much you can continue to do, because you are making a difference, or you are doing what you love, and that could be what drives you. So figuring it out, but definitely having at least someone you can go all Brooklyn with them.
That's right. And I'm not even from Brooklyn, so, but tequila was the best answer, I think.
I just want to say thank you for your talk. It's very inspiring to see women leading. My name's Alora. I'm a graduate student studying sustainability, and I'm a researcher at the Sweetie Center for Sustainable Food Systems. In your talks, a few of you mentioned food systems and how farmers are on the forefront of climate change. And we especially can see that in Arizona, where drought and heat have huge impacts on the viability of agriculture in the state. So I'm a bit curious on like what the EPA does for farmers. Like, what does that work in that space look like since you're a regulatory body? Like, are you trying to get more farmers to be climate friendly, or is it more like adapting after disasters have happened?
Well, I know Meg and I are gonna have different focus areas on this one, but agriculture is so critical in so many ways to not just the climate issues, but just so much of our society. And you know, in my area, in the part of the state called the San Joaquin Valley, which is basically between LA and Sacramento, there's the largest agricultural production in the nation. And you have a lot of air emissions from that. So our focus is actually reducing the emissions from a localized air pollution concern. One of the biggest programs we have is a tractor replacement program. The other is new technology for harvesting in terms of technique, not just the tractor, but we are the world's #1 almond producer. You may have heard that. And the way we harvest extremely, you know, getting this big tractor and shaking the trees and all the nuts come down. And then the way we actually pick it up from the ground creates a lot of PM10. It's the largest source of dust. You have that in one of your neighboring counties here as well. They're also a violator of PM10. Pinal County, am I saying that right? No. So we, you know, that is like, okay, so when we transition the tractor for purposes of dust, PM 2.5 and PM10, we also have the opportunity to reduce the NOx that are also contributing to the greenhouse gases as well. But I think we also have a lot that we're not lead on, to be frank, because the other #1 producer of commodities in California, and I don't think it's #1 but it's a large one in Arizona, is dairy production. And obviously the methane production from those operations is second to oil and gas operation. So it's a major source that we currently have a non-regulatory approach to as EPA. And that will be your job, most likely. But I think that it is it's an area that states are leading on for the climate side. And I would say, generally speaking, are we looking at the systemic solutions? Not quite yet. I think we just started an Office of Agriculture and Rural Communities. That was a month ago or so. And I think that's the recognition that we got to look at this in a broader sense. But we partner so much with USDA and NRCS in particular, because they have much more resources on looking at how to get to sustainable operations.
Yeah, so a couple of things to add, actually. I don't know that I'm going to have entirely different things to say than you, but the partnerships I think are a really important piece. I mean, she already mentioned USDA, certainly working with our states. We've also done a lot of partnerships with the universities, actually, in our region. And in the talk about methane emissions, we have a lot of CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations in Region 7, and that's a lot of methane. In November, I guess it was, we co-hosted an anaerobic digestion on the farm conference. So that was one, example of the types of conversations that we're trying to have to bring people together to come up with those innovative solutions to deal with a lot of the issues that are certainly being presented in rural parts of the country in ag communities. And so that's one example. Hopefully those are the kinds of things that we can, partner with you all to help us figure out those solutions.
Do you have any comments on agriculture? You don't have to talk about this.
I would just say that for our jurisdiction purposes, a lot of it is trying to figure out what to do with the wastewater and the water and how it's impacting, especially on the East Coast, the streams and the rivers, and because there's no point source, a lot of times it just kind of flows in. So, so on the regulatory piece, I think we're a little bit more limited. So working with our partners and trying to think of those policies on the East Coast, CAFOs, obviously hog farms, dairy, they're huge, and the pollution is usually due to that mix of the waste and water, and that's how we're trying to tackle it.
And I'll just add that, as Martha said, I mean, this is really a challenge on the climate space because we're all going to have to eat. That's a given, and this is clearly a set of principles that Lisa mentioned in terms of do no harm, right? How do you actually get something that we need as mankind, but not do harm? And I think this space is really a difficult space for EPA and everyone else. I think it does need a lot of innovation, a lot of partnership, and a lot of information.
I'll just mention quickly on the climate front in Puerto Rico and the USVI, we're seeing a little bit of an argument and challenge come up in that to drive the clean energy future, some developers are looking for lands to build out the solar farm. And the communities are saying that's pristine agricultural land and we should use it for agricultural purposes. And so there's a little bit of a struggle in like, how do you make sure that we still have lands to do this agricultural work and not take it for other kind of development? And that's definitely, at least the islands, because there's not much land left. And in hurricanes, what's certainly after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, it was the local farmers that were feeding the island because they couldn't ship in all the food. It was just a struggle. So,
Well, the other island, Hawaii, Hawaii has had 100% clean energy goal. They're the first state in the nation. And we just went out to a grant we were able to participate in funding. They basically required these lands to have renewable production, and solar was the predominant, but it also had to have continued farming. So yes, they're a little bit wider in between the solar panels, but there's continued agricultural operation. And they also gave a preference to the Native Hawaiian population to have access to those lands first. So it's just a very, some of the ag stuff, you gotta be careful because like if it works at a micro level, it may not work at a macro level. But, so many of our things that we deal with, ultimately, we as consumers have a role. It's not to say that I still, obviously, as regulators, regulation is the most important thing. But when we look at so many of our areas of pollution, like we're in the south coast of California has the worst ozone in the nation. And why is that? It's ultimately because we need to have our, shipment every day. Our Amazon has to come in every day. That's our culture, right? And we also have a culture where we have a lot of dairy consumption. I think it's the highest in the world per capita. And so that's our culture. And so it's going to take a transition of a cultural change of many of these things. And regulation, the art of regulating and therefore staying in political power is how you don't lie about that. I mean, I'll say, it's like break time here. As Democrats, we are not lying about what's happening in our climate, right? So we start there with the truth. And then the transition it's where it's all in the transition. How are we, if you look at it from a purely scientific lens, we should all be vegans. And I'm not a vegan. I try to use more oat milk, but I love my ice cream and my cheese. So, But how do we talk about the reality of that? And how do we talk about our consumerism driving air pollution in our port communities? They're bearing the brunt for us having the convenience of our Amazon packages. And we gotta talk about the big picture while we're forced to regulate the truckers and we're forced to regulate the locomotives, and some of these are big guys, some of them are little guys. And so it could become really regressive if we don't take on the system, But what does that mean? Are we gonna limit everybody's Amazon purchase to 1 day a week? Can we do it?
Well, I remember the debate that I was involved in decades ago was, should we not have delivery for mail on Saturdays? And then we still have delivery for mail in Saturdays. Anyway, well, how about around the hand for our, yeah?